Hello, today is September 19th. I'm doing this video to go over some of what I've seen from your week 2 and week 3 responses and to talk about the upcoming Fanatical Schemes paper and just to do a little bit of housekeeping. So where I am in grading is I've graded week 2 discussion board posts and reading questions. Those are all done. It's always going to be my goal to have both sets of those assignments when you have both sets of assignments graded within a week. So hopefully I can stick to that. I started grading your week 3 reading questions and I just finished with those. So I haven't touched the discussion board yet for week 3. So I'll be able to offer feedback about that later this week or early next week. I really hope that the Canvas interface is letting you know when you have comments, hopefully comments to or responses to your discussion board posts, because other people will make those or I will make those, which I did last week for almost everyone, or for your reading questions, because I rarely responded to those for week 2, but I gave a lot of responses for your week 3 reading questions. And I hope that you're able to see those because I give a grade, but in most cases I either say good job, great job, or here's some things you need to work on in my comment box. So look for comments, my responses and comments to your discussion board post or your reading questions if you haven't seen them already. So there were a couple of things, mostly from week 2 discussion, but also from that I saw again in some of the week 3 reading question responses. One issue with understanding that I think is just going to get better over time the more we read about and put into practice ideas about demagoguery is the difference between being in an us versus them or in-group, out-group situation and what that has to do with demagoguery. This is sort of a logic structuring it like a logic problem. Demagoguery is always going to require that there is an in-group and an out-group, because remember, demagogue and the culture that gives rise to the demagogue will be driven to identify who the in-group is, who the good people are, and then who to scapegoat for the in-group's problems. So it's required in demagoguery that there be an in-group and out-group. That can't be the only thing going on for demagoguery, but it has to happen. Another in-group, out-group situation, or an us versus them situation, some of what some of you talked about, does not necessarily mean that that's a demagogic atmosphere or context. Because if you just have a disagreement with someone, you hold different positions on an issue, whether that's a policy issue or not, maybe just one of taste. That doesn't mean that there's demagoguery at work in that situation. It just means that you have a disagreement, which is, of course, fine. I was interested to see how many people who are teachers wondered about or made the claim that they were in an us versus them situation vis-a-vis their students, because there's obviously, or arguably, a power dynamic when you go into a school setting and you maybe submit to that power dynamic as a student, or you assume that power dynamic, that you have more power over the students as a teacher. So that made me think about my own classroom and whether I saw that as, being in the classroom as a collaborative experience. What do I think of my own authority? Do I see it as an agonistic or antagonistic relationship? And college students are different than middle school or high school students, of course. So that really made me think about, how teachers and students might see themselves, whether they're an in-group and an out-group, and they have opposing interests. So just to reiterate, demagoguery needs to have in-groups and out-groups, or un-in-group and maybe several out-groups. But having disagreements or being in a potentially contentious power relationship does not mean that it is demagoguery. So some people seem to conflate those, and I tried to respond and point that out when I could. But I want you to see the response that I made. So check for that on the discussion board if you haven't gotten a notification about it already. Another issue that I saw because of the question asked in week 2, but I think there continues to be some confusion about it from the reading question responses from the first part of fanatical schemes, is how stasis theory helps us understand demagoguery. So it seemed like some people were kind of fluffing their way through that either in week 2 or week 3, but I wanted to try to clear that up if I could. So, and I know that the way Roberts-Miller talks about or names the stases between demagoguery and democracy and fanatical schemes is different, and that's honestly to be expected because throughout the history of stasis theory, the theorists, or at least people who wrote that theory down, there's been a lot of slippage between what the questions are and how they get divided up and what are like the important basic stases and what are kind of subtopics or substases underneath those. So in Demagoguery and Democracy, Roberts-Miller talks about moving from the policy stasis to the identity stasis, or back and forth, and that's something that demagogues always do. In fanatical schemes, there is an added main stasis of causality, and of course that's very important in the slavery debate. If that was confusing, or you look back at the reading I gave you, the Crowley and Haughey reading over stasis theory, you'll see that causality is one of the questions asked under conjecture, like what was the event and what caused it to happen. But causality is often moved out to be a stasis in itself. So I hope that wasn't too confusing that they were described in different ways. But going back to identity and causality and policy, and in-groups, out-groups, because they're all related. I hope you can see why in Demagoguery and Democracy, Roberts-Miller talks about a demagogue moving deliberation or trying to find some kind of answer, trying to figure out a way forward. They would move that from the policy stasis, specifically finding a way forward, passing a policy that will answer this question for you. They move it back to identity, so that's who are we? So that could be a definition question, or what kind of people are these people? What kind of people are these people? What kind of people are we? What kind of people are they? That which is a quality stasis question to ask. And so it's you can see it as kind of going backwards in the quest to find solutions for community problems. Because that's really what we're talking about, is a community trying to find, working together to try to find solutions through policies. But it also takes your attention and your work away from trying to hammer out what you could do for the problem and says, we'll get to that later. What we really need to work out is who are the good people and who are the bad people. So who do we consider to be among our in-group, and therefore who's not in the in-group, and they shouldn't even get a place at the table to talk about what the policy should be, because we're not going to count them as people, maybe, or they're not rational, they shouldn't have the same rights we should. So that's one way in that, and how stasis theory can help us understand demagoguery is, I think, like I said in my video before about stasis theory, you can see these as occurring in an order, and it is natural in a debate to step back and forth as needed to answer questions as they come up. But Roberts-Miller argument is that moving forward means moving forward through the stases from conjecture, definition, quality to policy, to the policy stasis, where the debate is resting on what should we do, but to back that up and say, how do we define who the good people are, or who are the good people, who are the quality people that we really need to be thinking about when we enact the policy or write the policy or vote on the policy, rather than the policy itself. And so it detracts attention away from solving the problem to kind of defining who counts and kicking the can of solving the problem down the road, especially if you're thinking about electoral politics or presidential politics and saying, we just need to decide on the guy or the woman who's a good person, is going to solve our problem for us. So we, the voters, don't need to worry about the nuts and bolts of creating a policy. So that's, I think, the basic level of how Robert Miller connects stasis theory with demagoguery. How much time have I used? Enough time, so I'm going to end this video here, and then I'm going to talk about the fanatical schemes paper in a separate video.